Hi, welcome back. I'm Evie and I do mini video essays analyzing society, and today I wanted to talk about the myth that there is a life cycle to an empire and it also somehow lasts 250 years, like a tortoise in captivity. Why would people say that? And more importantly, why would anyone believe it? I caught myself believing it at times. But just open a history book and you will see that the story is not quite so simple. Here are empires that lasted for longer than 250 years, and here are empires that lasted for a shorter period of time, yet we still call them empires. Obviously then, the point of the story is not historical analysis, so what is it then? When you throw the number around, you can pretend to be a scholar. It means that you encountered a meme from history, so what else do you know? And you get to make people feel bad by telling them doom is just around the corner. And who could resist making people feel bad? It's satisfying, like a symbol that in the middle of chaos, a great analyst and scholar can find order. At least I guess they can think, told you, while the world is burning around them, as predicted. Which is kinky in a terrible way. Go to Roman jail. I get that history needs to be simplified when you teach it. You cannot include absolutely everything. History, with everything, is called the present. But history is neither linear nor cyclical. History is fairly random, and in the not-so-grand scheme of things, that's kind of worse. But everyone loves the myths of doom, be it the leftiest liberal or the rightmost doomer who says good times produce weak men all day. It's just eschatology. Before secularism, it was the Bible that provided cautionary tales, and we don't have that now, not quite as much anymore. We wish that our time was as unique as that of the Roman Empire, so we could be sure that people would talk about us for thousands of years to come. Why the Roman Empire? With Enlightenment, people began to realize there was this thing called the past and began exploring it in a more systematic way. They knew about Rome before, but at the end of the 18th century, Edward Gibbon published his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. He really loved Rome. He attributed the decline mostly to how Christianity transformed the culture, from focusing on the here and now, very simply put, to the afterlife and spirituality and church. I think that's one way in which the West was never like pre-Christian Rome. It was either Christian or a different flavor of Christian, so you never really lived in the here and now. I guess we need to be pagan again. Anyhow, if we are to accept that critique as semi-valid, then I don't see how contemporary conservative arguments follow from this, apart from the fact that they too now follow their own agenda. But if the core of the problem is that you don't focus on living in the here and now, then more of Christianity is hardly the solution if that's what caused the problem. But it sounds cool and aspirational that there was a time when people were not overly spiritual, were living in the here and now, and at the same time had a unified sense of duty towards the empire. I like it. It doesn't sound like a realistic outcome of human nature, but it is a good piece of secular eschatology. How dare I claim that it's just people trying to do Bible 2.0? Because if it wasn't that, if they were actually describing reality, then the West would have been dying for centuries at this point. The West is dead. Hashtag 1918 vibes. Later, when the world was transitioning into modernity, Oswald Spengler published his infamous book, The Decline of the West, in 1918. He was German. And the year was 1918. Obviously, he was just depressed. And he was beautifully, deliciously mocked by the British for his book back then. Cyclical history, man. One of the empires that is actually dead today is the British Empire, but seeing it during the time it was happening hardly required a genius. The essay in which the lifespan of empires was announced to the entire world, to the surprise of absolutely everyone who ever opened a history book, was written in 1976 by Sir John Glubb. What an unfortunate name. Called Age of Empires, Fate of Empires, and the Search for Survival. So the myth came about from the context of the declining British Empire, which is what Sir John Glubb was analyzing. But he may have gone a bit overboard, which is to be expected with the genre of writing that is the Anglo-Saxon essay. It sounds smart, so people take it seriously, without a healthy dose of skepticism about its substance. It's cool to analyze history, but the problem is when you try to brute force the pattern onto the future, which is what Sir John Glubb kinda did, but he ended on a hopeful note that by preserving virtues of duty and self-sacrifice, we may just prevent the collapse of the next one. Yet another archetypal story that makes you feel like an agent of change. He defined empires in a very curious way. Look at the years he picked. This does not even make any sense. This is how it should be. But to be fair, he does not say that the ages are to be taken literally, which is a valid counter-argument to anyone who could try to dismiss his arguments off of purely the numbers alone. But the fact that it was written in 1976, and he put the beginning of the decline of the United States to the 60s, and to my surprise, he does not mention sexual revolution and feminism as one of the causes. It was the intellectuals who, according to him, were all talk and no action. And what period of time do most people today worship as the peak of human civilization? The 90s. And according to him, the decline is not reversible, so that does not really fit. And even if you subscribe to the idea that we peaked in the 60s, he would still not agree because he had put his beginning of the decline to that time. But you can see the pattern of the story, right? And put this to 500 BCE and it might as well be part of the Bible. And if you try hard enough, you can superimpose the patterns onto any period of time you want, even the psychological aspects. Time of pessimism masked as frivolity speeds up the decline. Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That could be said about any era. We just feel it more strongly about our time. Since the essay has seen the light of day, there were about half a dozen financial crises and, depending on your definition, about 24 armed conflicts that ended with peace. We are still here. If something bad happens, the fact that there were predictions will mean nothing. Did the Romans know their empire was ending? Nobody knows the future, not even the biggest egotist, but yes, you can safely say that they knew they were not doing so great. Basically, everything was wrong by the end. But the facts of the split itself were pretty straightforward. Theodosius split the empire between his two sons, Honorius and Arcadius, because among many other things, the bureaucracy was too much for one large empire. Anything we pick to analyze beyond that is purely symbolic. It depends on what you want to focus on. I don't get why people need to be able to say this is what happened to them, so it is going to lead to the end too, today. Like invasions of barbarians and abandoning the traditional religion. I don't like the way immigration or atheism would transform our empire today, but people need to outsource accountability elsewhere. It's the human thing to do. In hindsight, interpretations of the end of Rome emerged, serving the agenda of whoever was doing the interpreting, like the one of Zosimus, a pagan historian, who blamed the decline of Rome on the adoption of Christianity. Today nobody would say, or I guess some people would, that the fact that we are no longer pagan is the cause of the general moral degeneracy of this civilization. You could also easily argue that Rome isn't a part of our civilization anyway. Yes, the Enlightenment directly draws from the legal system, architecture, and from some cultural aspects, but it is more realistic to say that the West emerged in the early Middle Ages in the Rhine Valley. Whatever definition would include Rome and Greece would inevitably have to include the Islamic world as well, and I don't think that's realistic because it has been decided since the Crusades that Islam doesn't belong, but then Rome is hardly the beginning of our story. Or another actual civilizational analysis would say that you can't really speak of separate civilization today anyway. So if something ends, it technically didn't, just transformed. Just like the Roman way of life did not completely vanish after the end. But that's not good enough, so in terms of human psychology, it makes sense that the myth would feel effective. It's cool that we have the stories to make someone finally enact change, maybe. But just not now, thank you, and not me. The status quo is actually pretty cool, I'm good. I'll pass the hot potato of accountability to the next generation. And if by that point it will be too late and the West is over soon, whatever that means to anyone, then not because it was inevitable or limited by the 250-year cap. It would be my hope that the myth would get scrapped if it becomes unsustainable to defend it. But that's not the function of those stories. It will just get reinterpreted like the biblical prophecies do, or people will just find a new myth to make people feel bad about. We have reached the end. If all goes well, there will be more tomorrow. Be kind to yourselves, do one good thing to keep the world running, and subscribe if you thought this video was interesting.